All right, hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. This one has been a super long time coming. This is with Oren from, I don't even know where you're from necessarily, because I've tried to every time I join a new Discord or something, I'm like, oh, I'll try and contact an admin, and it's Oren. Like every single time, and that's like whenever they're like, oh, reach out to Hashi, and then it's you. But
Right, right.
I guess in
I
this context, you are Gnosis chain, right?
well, I guess yeah, Gnosis DAO, Gnosis Guild, Gnosis Chain. I don't know, somewhere in this kind of large nebulous thing that is the Gnosis ecosystem. Um, but yeah, so like my team is Gnosis Guild. We work on a whole bunch of different, mostly DAO tooling for the Gnosis DAO and the kind of broader DAO ecosystem, but then also just take on various different projects for the Gnosis DAO, and so Hashi is one of these.
Cool. So, I mean, how did you, so Hashi, which we're going to talk about here, it's a bridge. How did you get into bridges? Or like, how did they pick you, I guess, to lead the bridge?
Right, right, right. So, well, I guess we can disambiguate kind of Hashi, kind of what it is in a minute, but like we got into it just because we are users of bridges and we're very kind of security focused. It's something, it's an issue that we've identified in the space, essentially bridge security. Um, and I think something that's really necessary, kind of having a bridge that we really kind of buy into the trust assumptions of that we trust and are happy to kind of put significant amounts of capital at stake, or at risk kind of in using. And I mean, when I say significant amounts of capital, I mean like the Gnosis DAO's treasury. Large portions of it are kind of at risk of kind of the bridges that it's using to interact with different networks, different chains. And so this is the kind of need from our end, is we're wanting to make sure that there is something that we actually fully trust, or at least like we're happy with the risk, with using for the Gnosis DAO's treasury. Um, and yeah, to kind of disambiguate, Hashi itself isn't a bridge as such. Hashi is this kind of bridge aggregator. The idea here is that, essentially each of the I don't know, four of the top five, just kind of crypto related exploits are bridge related, right? If you check out, say, like the Rect leaderboard, I think four of the top five are bridges that have been exploited in some way. Kind of, there's been unexpected, kind of code issue that's enabled an exploit. There's been some social engineering attack that's enabled an exploit, and so like the it's very easy to say, okay, like those systems should have been better, right? We should have, you shouldn't have been able to socially engineer to kind of get control of a threshold of keys in order to kind of trigger a message, or there shouldn't have been a bug in the code. But I think the reality of software is that uh, there's almost always attack vectors, and it's really easy to kind of point it out in hindsight and say like, oh, this shouldn't have been there. But I mean, again, the reality is that humans writing code are flawed, and so like there's always a chance
Right.
that there will be flaws. And so the idea here with Hashi is to say there's these large systems that are dependent on the security of uh, bridges. In particular, you have the essentially canonical instance of a token on one chain, that is then kind of bridging a canonical representation of itself onto another chain. And so like that bridge, the security of that bridge is really, really critical if there's going to be a significant amount of value crossing it. If the kind of bridge representation of your token on another chain, the canonical kind of representation of it on that other chain is secured by one mechanism, then it's as fragile as that mechanism. Um,
Right.
and so that the argument with Hashi essentially is that we shouldn't be trusting just one mechanism. We should be baking kind of redundancy, and uh, creating much less kind of fragile systems and much less easily attackable systems. So you could draw the parallel to something like a RAID array, so a redundant array of independent drives for storage, where you say like we, rather than writing to one drive that if it breaks then we lose all of our stuff, we write everything to 3 disks in parallel, and if one breaks then we pull it out, we put a new one in, and the RAID remains healthy and kind of catches the new drive back up to the state of the existing 2 drives to get back to being kind of redundant. This is the kind of analogy we're using to think about hashi, this kind of redundant array of independent hash oracles. And so what we're proposing is, rather than relying on one bridge mechanism, you essentially set up or rely on multiple different kind of independent implementations, independent operators of bridges. They could be things like Oracle committees like Wormhole or the Gnosis chain A and B. It could be things like ZK Light clients like the Succinct Labs telepathy bridge. And you essentially want to get diversity in the types of bridges that are underlying your hashi setup, and then require a threshold of those bridges to agree on any given state change in order to actually trigger change in then the dependent systems.
Yeah, well, we can get into drawing it, but I know a little bit because I've been following, but I would love for the audience, so Gnosis chain, there you guys are a separate layer 1. You're not a roll-up or anything. And then you guys had what was, I believe it was OmniBridge was your main bridge, and you're looking
and it still is.
And you're looking to replace that though, right?
Yeah, I think at some point we would like to replace that. And I mean, maybe not replace OmniBridge itself, but the mechanism that underpins it. So underneath,
so it would turn into a hashi bridge, right?
Right. Yeah. So underneath the OmniBridge right now is this arbitrary message bridge. And so I think that's the layer that would ideally be replaced. So the arbitrary message bridge is this this Oracle committee type thing. It's effectively a multi-sig. You've got X number of these kind of message oracles, and they need to, you need a threshold of those oracles to agree on any given message that was passed from one chain to another, which is, given who the oracles are, I mean, I personally trust them, but you shouldn't have to trust them.
Yes, exactly. Right? No, I mean, I just, and also was wondering, like, what was your guys' thought process? Because like, I know a lot of chains are sort of undergoing the same discussion, where we need bridges, and can we build, a lot of people are throwing around the idea of, should we build a native bridge? Should we rely singly on one of these solutions or bridges that people have? And you guys ultimately didn't choose that. So, like, what was there a thought where you guys were thinking of doing a native bridge, or was that always kind of off the table for other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this probably goes, well, I guess like a native bridge is an interesting thing to disambiguate anyway, because I think, there's probably a huge room for interpretation for what that means. But to a certain extent, kind of Gnosis chain, or like we at least inherited the current setup. So Gnosis chain was previously XDAI, and kind of the choice to have bridging operate with an A and B, or with this Oracle committee style bridge, as opposed to something like a light client, which is maybe what you're referring to when you say native bridge, or something else entirely. I mean, for
well, I mean, having your validators,
bridge, right? And so like the idea of having the validators participate in the bridging process, essentially operate the bridge, is I guess somewhat the same as this idea of a light client. It's just the distinction is just like, who are the operators of the light client. And so, this is definitely something that we've thought a lot about, and I think the realization was that the two aren't mutually exclusive, right? You can have this kind of light client style bridge, you can have this light client style bridge operated by your validators, make it part of your validator duties, all these kind of things. But even that kind of a setup still has implementation risk. It still has a risk where you could have some kind of implementation bug that then ultimately allows it to be exploited. And so it's still a safer setup to use this in parallel with other bridge mechanisms and create this kind of diversity to allow for redundancy and kind of less fragility.
Cool. Yeah, no, good answer. All right, well, yeah, we'll start drawing.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we can start, let's just do let's do a user, I guess, like they want to bridge a token over, right? That would be the
Yeah.
idea.
So I think, well, let's continue to say be great. Let's do that again for user, because I think there's probably two very distinct classes of users here for this example, right? And essentially, I'd separate them by size of transaction and the kind of trust assumptions that are necessary, right? So if you've got I don't know, a typical end user that's going to be bridging a few hundred, a few thousand, maybe even a few tens of thousands of dollars worth of assets.
So he'll be over here on Ethereum, right? Or
right.
will this be Ethereum or will this be any bridge?
I think it's any chain to any chain, EVM chain to EVM chain.
Okay, so ETH for purposes here.
Right. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's probably a class of user that would trade speed for security, right? Or that would want
nobody would ever do that, Oren.
and cost for security.
Right.
Sorry, cost for speed as well. And so, well, actually, the cost for speed thing is a bit of a different trade-off in this scenario. But the point being that like redundancy is expensive, right?
Correct.
So if you require 3 different bridges to pass your message to ultimately get it across, then you're paying 3 different bridges to pass that message. And so like that's going to be expensive. It's probably going to be slow. And so there's probably some cutoff in terms of the value that you're sending. If you're below this threshold, it doesn't make sense to pay 3 separate bridges, and it doesn't make sense to wait however long it's going to take to get those 3 bridges to execute. So this kind of smaller user is more than likely going to interact with some layer on top of this that kind of aggregates, right? So the small user is probably going to leverage connects or hop or something like this that is ultimately that layer will ultimately be the user of something like hashi once they've kind of bundled up, once the operators on that layer have accumulated enough of a kind of value transfer to where it makes sense to use this more expensive, slower method with more redundancy.
Yeah. So we actually had connects done they were a month ago. So
right, okay.
For anyone watching, go watch the connects video a month ago if you have no idea what he's talking about. But okay, so this guy, if we're using hashi, we're assuming this is a big guy. He wants a lot of security and he's willing to pay for it. So it'll be like the connects team who's aggregating a whole bunch of users, or it'll be some giant
DAO, or
some whale who wants to move a bunch of assets over to Gnosis chain.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so here's this guy. We'll assume he's got cool spiky hair because he's a whale. And so he'll deposit it into the contract, and then this contract will this is like the smart contract on ETH that'll lock his tokens, right?
Right. So you would have some bridge contract that is then going to
emit an event that and you pass it over. I'm guessing it emits an event, and then it would go to the hashi contracts where you would have how many are you in? 5 oracles or 5?
I mean, this is really kind of user defined, and when I say user in this context, I mean like if you're setting up the canonical bridge for your
chain, right?
For your token or whatever, then you define kind of which set of oracles you need to get a threshold between in order to mint and burn tokens on the corresponding chain. But yeah, so you probably have this bridge end contract that a user interacts with. They're going to lock their tokens into that. That's going to trigger and a message to be passed, which probably emits the event, as well as putting it into storage on or putting kind of a hash of it into storage on the origin chain. The reason being that you want to make that hash of that message accessible to various different bridge mechanisms. So some might rely on an event, some might rely on it being in storage. For instance, if you'll need to do kind of a storage proof from a block header or something like that. So the message that's dispatched would go into storage and be emitted as an event. Then you would have various different bridge mechanisms that all kind of independently bridge that hash.
So these would be like, I think it would be like Gnosis A and B would be one. Then you have succinct, which we talked about, which passes over. Like that's kind of the whole EVM light client. So the proof would be in there.
Yep.
And then you would have, what are other ones like?
Wormhole is another.
Wormhole's kind of a multi-sig approach, more or less, right?
Yep.
And then like what, layer 0 or something?
Yeah. You can say layer 0 is another option. So throw that in there. So here we've got
or you could use like Teller. We'll just throw that one out.
Yeah.
Any Oracle, like Chainlink or any Oracle basic. It could be one guy, right? Probably.
Right, exactly. It could be Joe, and you just trust Joe's.
We'll put Joe in here, just so everyone knows. So you could put Joe, and then so this is set up by this is set up by Gnosis. Have you guys decided your oracles yet, or is this all just
no?
Okay,
not yet. Yeah.
So I'm guessing this will be voted on by the DAO or something.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I assume it would be voted on by the DAO, and there'd be, I don't know, some reasonably diligent process to figuring out which set of oracles we should use, but that's probably jumping the gun a little bit.
I'm sure there will be no. I'm sure that'll be drama free.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not sure that Joe will make the cut.
Team Joe over
here. So now we've got our 5 oracles. We might say that kind of 3 of these 5 or 4 of these 5 need to agree on the message being passed. And so essentially what we'll have here is when on the corresponding side, you'll have a contract that wants to, where you can mint the tokens that had been bridged. So you'll make a call to that mint tokens, and that's going to kind of make a call back to the bridge contract to validate that these tokens can actually be minted, that there was a corresponding kind of hash that allows you to mint these tokens. What that's to kind of validate the hash, hashi will kind of iterate through this list of bridges and ensure that a threshold of those bridges agree on the state.
So would it be, I'm guessing this would be customizable as far as like you would say 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, and then you would
exactly, yeah. And so like what threshold you need is again kind of defined by the end, by like the system that is dependent on that bridge. So you have a token bridge that's dependent on hashing, and the token bridge gets to define what its threshold and set of oracles are.
Right, but there's no reason this would need to be a token bridge, or it could just be an arbitrary message bridge. That would nothing would change really, right?
Right. Well, and again, so like nothing. It could be an arbitrary message bridge. It could be a token bridge. It could be whatever other kind of use case you want. But again, it's the system that's kind of dependent on that bridge that kind of deploys the end points of it that gets to decide what that threshold is. It's like we as the folks deploying hashi as a system don't dictate any of those things. We don't dictate which set of bridges you trust as someone kind of being dependent on hashi. You choose which, or as a protocol or as a system kind of built on top of hashi, you get to choose which.
Well, I'm guessing for Gnosis you would pick, right? Like Gnosis would be like the DAO would pick for all the token bridges, right? Or would each individual token pick?
So I think each token bridge would pick, right? And so like you may have different token bridges deployed that would end up creating different instances of the same tokens on other networks. I mean, this is already the case
Yep.
on many layers, like where you have multiple different instances of, say, DAI or USDC on a given network because there's multiple bridges going across. And so I think, yeah, each bridge, in that case, each token bridge would kind of define the set of oracles that it trusts
Okay.
or that it needs consensus between in order to mint tokens via that bridge.
Cool.
I could imagine a scenario even that goes a layer deeper than that. This is like each token in using a given bridge can decide what its set of oracles are. But I think that implies a level of ownership or governance over each token contract that is probably not true of many. Essentially, like it would imply that kind of there being some entity that owns the token, the canonical instance of the token on its kind of origin chain, that can then go and define what those oracles are on the destination chain. I think that's probably more responsibility and not entirely possible in every case.
Well, you could see people setting it up in the bad way too. You know, like, oh, I'll come
Right.
bridge your USDC over using Nick as the oracle, and
Right,
then I just rug
exactly.
everybody as soon as they put any money in there. So yeah, no, it would be, so basically you still have to look at the underlying to actually look at any security. And I mean, like, what are your thoughts, like, whenever you're using the bridge, like any of these, you know, like ideally in a system, you know, like would you be able to change this set when it's live? Would that be like a governance parameter as well?
Yeah,
Or
so I think that's again dependent on the way that you set the system up. So we have a version of so basically this is hashi contract, which is stateless, and then you on top of that would use this giri hashi contract, which is or the shoyu hashi contract, sorry, which is like ownable hashi, essentially, where you can set an owner of it, and you can in that contract kind of add state to it in terms of the set of oracles that need to be need to kind of reach consensus, the threshold of those oracles, the kind of how governable that is kind of up to you to a certain extent, like up to the governance mechanisms that you place on top of it that you have as the owner. I mean, it could be anywhere from kind of not governable at all if you just burn the owner key, if you kind of renounce ownership,
yep.
to kind of having a full DAO that can kind of change that set of oracles at any time, or a multi-sig that can do it, or an individual Joe could control it. You could also we also have another contract actually, which is what I was working on right before the call. So Shoyu Hashi is this kind of ownable version, and then Giri Hashi, or sorry, Giri Bashi is this version of it that adds some more kind of complex rules around when and why you can change the oracle set. So the idea here is that if everything is behaving as expected, then governance has no authority to change already initialized sets of oracles. So you kind of initialize a set of oracles, say like 5 oracles with a threshold of 3. And if all of those oracles are behaving as expected, they're reporting on time, they're all agreeing, then the governance can't change anything. But you have this option, or this ability to challenge oracles that are misbehaving or not reporting. And so if an oracle reports differently to a threshold of oracles, then you can challenge it, quarantine it, and then governance is allowed to replace it. And similarly, if an oracle is kind of not reporting, then you could challenge it. And if it kind of times out, doesn't report on time, then governance is able to replace it. So this is kind of we figured it was worthwhile building 2 versions of this. One that's just kind of unopinionated, it just gives really basic access control. Owner has the ability to change all of these things. And then another that's a little bit more opinionated, where
Right.
it kind of says the owner can change things when bridges are misbehaving.
Yep. Yeah, because I mean, like, I think you know, you have like sort of two risks, you know, with bridges or oracles. Like the first one is obviously like they sign a bad message, and what's the risk there? And you know, it would be like basically what's the cost to corrupt 3 out of 5 of them? And that's probably like a harder one, I would say, to do. But like there's the other risk of like them just shutting off and censoring um
Right.
certain transaction. You know, like because if like for instance, you know, if somebody built like a cross-chain tornado cache or something crazy. But you know, like if some of these guys didn't respond to pass those messages for regulatory reasons, like would there be any way to pass those messages using this, or would you have to make
Right.
sure that
Was
you
it?
set something up?
And I think that's the point with that's like one of the reasons for hashi being interesting as well. Like I talked about fragility earlier. This kind of a setup is less fragile
Right.
because of that reason. Like if one shuts off and stops processing messages because they think there's some regulatory risk, then hopefully your threshold allows the system to continue operating, and then you can replace that one that's stopped reporting. Um, the the challenge here is like is kind of creating this redundancy, and in particular, if you want to create this redundancy in a way that allows you to make changes in future, creating that setup in a way that doesn't then essentially push all of the risk onto that governance mechanism. You know,
Yep.
like all of this redundancy is pointless if the governance mechanism is easily capturable or easily exploitable, right? So like the thing that owns this system, if you can just capture that and swap out the oracles to whatever you like, you know, if Joe can capture governance and then make themselves the only oracle and a threshold of one, then they capture the whole system and end up wrecking it anyway. So this is the reason for this kind of more opinionated version. They're saying like, I think there's a route here that gives governance much less power once the thing is already in play, but as a kind of happy middle ground between governance having power and kind of the thing being entirely immutable. Immutability is I think a really great property in a lot of scenarios, but introduces fragility. And so if you want a system that both has this kind of security property and anti-fragility property, then I think it's necessary for some parts of it to be able to change.
Yeah, no, I mean we had basically like every protocol I've had on this show, you always have that problem with oracles or bridges. It's like if you're upgradable in the oracle and you can upgrade yourself, that's good, but then you have upgradability and governance risk around your oracle. But then if
Right.
you say like you're not upgradable, now any protocol using you has to be upgradable or has to have an upgradable oracle function in case you decide to fork and change. You know, similar to like when you went from Uniswap v2 to v3, everyone had to change their oracle address or the address they were looking to Uniswap for prices. And so yeah, it's super tough. And I think, you know, is there for hashi as a product, you know, do you guys just solely just want to make these smart contract plugin layers, or do you plan on like running this for any other chain, or making sure that it connects properly just for Gnosis chain?
I think this is all to a certain extent yet to be discovered. It's definitely like a system of contracts that we'll deploy anywhere and everywhere that we can,
Right.
kind of hashi base layer. And then I think how we end up using it. I should be very explicit there. Like hashi as a base layer is just a public good. There's nothing kind of monetizable about the hashi contracts. It is, like I said, the base layer of hashi is just this stateless contract that aggregates a bunch of different bridge calls. And then you kind of deploy your own instances of the other contracts on top of that if you're a system that's dependent on it. And so like I think where there's potential to productize this is in things like the Omni bridge, right? That
Yep.
if we replace the AMB component of the Omni bridge with hashi, then that could be productized and rolled out to many different networks as an option that people might use if they want highly secure kind of bridge setup with this redundancy as a feature. But hashi itself is really just a public good that we want to put out into the world and hope that people start using for the sake of kind of more secure bridging.
Yeah, speaking of monetizing, how do you pay these guys? Is that built into the contracts, or is that sort of you have to go negotiate it and make sure they're doing it all?
I think the assumption here is that those mechanisms all have their own monetization baked in, right? So like hashi is just querying each of those things via whatever mechanism they already operate
Okay.
under. So like if you want to pass a message across the A and B, you have to pay the gas and kind of whatever fees the oracles are charging to kind of pass a message. Or if you want to pass a message over wormhole or succinct telepathy or teller or whatever it is, like they all have their own economics baked into them. So hashi doesn't need to, hashi can be kind of totally agnostic to all of that.
So you're just ready over here to do a read function into the contract, and you hope these have all pushed to the value that you're hoping for, and
Exactly, yeah.
you need to pay them to make sure they're doing that.
Right, exactly. So I mean,
Right.
like this is where I was saying, kind of as this end user
Yep.
who's trying to bridge some tokens across, there's probably some minimum viable amount of funds that you need to be bridging before it actually makes sense. Because yeah, you've now got to go and pay 3 bridges or 5 bridges or whatever
Yep.
to get this message across as opposed to 1.
If it's from Ethereum, it's like $100,000. It's like,
Right. But
yeah.
like the nice thing with that is like the actual send part of it probably doesn't change cost that dramatically. I guess for the Oracle kind of committee bridges, it maybe does, because usually you have some kind of push
Oh, right, because I guess it
to
would be
send a message.
going this direction is cheap, so you can get off. Would just be
Yeah,
going the
exactly.
other way is the expensive way.
The other way is expensive,
Yeah,
definitely.
which yeah, good, nice setup. You got everyone. They can never leave.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Um,
and the nice thing there is like ideal case is you've got these setups going between uh, all of the other L2s and side chains and kind of different EVM environments as well. So it's like
right.
you should be able to kind of bridge state out of Ethereum mainnet relatively cheaply, and then bridge state between all of the other EVM environments very cheaply as well. Even if
Well,
you're
I mean that's a question though, because like you have like if you have like a polygon over here, and then you mint these ones here, and then mint over here another token. Like let's say you're passing like the USDC, you pass it to Gnosis chain, and then pass it to Polygon. Like, is that the same fungible token that was passed? Like if you do an ETH to Polygon transfer,
right, and no, it's probably not. And so this is where again
right?
layers like Connext come in,
Yep.
where
You would sort of
unless you're
need
doing
them to do that, and then they would go the long route.
exactly, they'd go the long route once they'd accumulated enough and there was a reasonable kind of arbitrage opportunity.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's going to be super interesting, because I think like that's like this was my prediction I made on like the last few episodes. Like, and for whatever reason, Ethereum's just going to be that long route, and that's like going to be all Ethereum's used for. It's like
Right.
everyone's bridges have to go through Ethereum, and then it'll be yeah, no, because it's weird. But okay, and all right, what am I missing here? What didn't I ask, or didn't I go into enough before
I
I ask
think
you other random questions?
yeah, I think we've covered it pretty well actually.
Okay.
Um, I don't think we've missed anything critical.
I'm okay. So for these guys too, like I've talked to a lot of them, and I've done a lot of bridges on the show, and like how hard is it finding like live bridges that are like ready to go and sort of fit any level of decentralization out there? You know,
Uh,
is there
I
a
don't know. I mean,
minimum threshold you're looking for? Especially like like I know you're going from Ethereum, and that can be done, but if you're like looking to go Gnosis Polygon or Gnosis Binance chain, like are there a lot of options out there even? Like, could
Uh,
you do a 3 of 5?
I maybe I don't know. I personally haven't gotten super deep into like hunting for the bridges that we're actually going to use on top of this
Right.
for kind of the multitude of different routes yet. So I'm honestly not sure. I think kind of as a as a bare minimum, we know that we can always spin up the A and B for any route.
Yep.
So there's always at least one. Um, but the point here is redundancy. So it'd be great to have more than one. I think Wormhole is deployed on a lot of different routes. I think Layer Zero is deployed on a lot of different routes.
Sure.
Um, and I think the intent with telepathy is to deploy on a pretty decent number of different routes. Although I think they maybe are intending to go to mostly go that long route between many different chains, or at least like that's where the immediate value seems to be is kind of connecting mainnet to other chains. And so
Yep.
yeah, I don't know. I think that'll be an interesting challenge. It's uh, further ahead in terms of priorities for what I've needed to focus on so far, but there's definitely some folks at Gnosis that are thinking further ahead on that.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's it's definitely a problem. And I mean, because you guys are trying, like where would you say, throughout this process, I can ask you the more fun ones, like how has your view of bridges changed throughout doing this, or has it? Like if you would look back, like I know you were in the space like in 2019 or something, like what was your view of bridges then, and how has it sort of changed over the years as you've been watching?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I up until more recently, I don't know, within the last couple of years, I just kind of took bridges for granted to a certain extent. Kind of understood that there was some trust assumptions, but like there's relatively few options for bridging between networks. There was essentially, if you wanted to interact with a new network, well, with yeah, some other network, if you wanted to kind of bring assets from Ethereum to somewhere else, it's typically one route, and so that was just kind of part of the trust assumption that you had to take on board in order to interact with some new network. I think the the fact that there are now, in a lot of cases, multiple bridge options, I think is really interesting.
Yep.
And kind of diversity of choice is definitely a good thing. But there's challenges in this, essentially in that there's a necessity for there to be some canonical instances of tokens on a given network for other systems to function as intended. It's really difficult to I don't know, like DeFi is much more difficult if there's 50 different versions of USDC floating around that you have to treat equally. And it is much more risky if you're kind of then taking on the risk of the 50 different bridges that mint these 50 different USDC clones. Then if you kind of can trust one. Um, so
But at the same
yeah,
time, like is the 50 more desirable in the sense that if something breaks,
well, I
then
think like if you're having
no,
to treat if each of those 50 are dependent on one bridge, right, on 50 different bridges,
right,
but then you're treating each of those 50 USDC clones as fungible, as
right,
kind of identical to one another, then if one of those 50 bridges breaks, it breaks all of them. It breaks all of the right, because they if
sure,
my and so like if the 50 different bridges are used in a kind of hashi-like setup to create this ridiculous amount of redundancy, then things become much more secure because you're deploying kind of one instance of USDC from the consensus of a whole bunch of different bridges. But if you have 50 instances of USDC that are kind of treated as fungible, and kind of breaking any one of them breaks the whole thing, then it's a super fragile system.
But I mean, what would you say about that for like bridge models? Because I know like everything's sort of free or by VCs or tokens, right? But in the future world where like, you know, these guys have to get paid and have to sort of, or theoretically they would have to get paid in some way, like wouldn't this model sort of tend to fall towards like the cheaper bridges in some sense? Or like
Yeah,
yeah, what would be the game theoretical outcome here, I guess, of like in the long run, you know, like how do you sustain it as far as people paying for it?
right. I mean, I think each of those bridge mechanisms that you're passing messages across needs to have some monetization option, or some way of monetizing, some way of kind of essentially paying the operators of the bridge. You know, whether that's the oracles and those oracle committee setups, or whether it's the person running the computation for the ZK Lite client, kind of providing the ZK proofs. Like the bridge needs to charge for that, needs to cover their costs. I do think that there's probably to a certain extent, a race to the bottom in terms of
Yeah.
cost coverage. You know, it probably normalizes somewhere slightly above whatever the costs are. But I think there's also this
Well, I mean, I was
a
I was
certain
just
amount of the kind of Lindy effect there, in terms of like large scale systems are going to be much more willing to trust bridges that have, and kind of combinations of bridges in this case, that have proven to not be exploited for a longer period of time, and kind of would be willing to pay a premium for that. You know, even a kind of brand new clone of some existing system that that has that effect, has that kind of trust built up over a long time, is still a brand new implementation of it that's going to require people to then make changes to their current setup to kind of participate in that race to the bottom. And so I think like there's a pretty significant kind of first or early mover advantage for these bridges that will kind of allow them to retain or to kind of monetize more effectively than later entrants. But yeah, I think it's a general rule that those mechanisms will be kind of price competitive, and the kind of end users, or the kind of bridge mechanisms that are built on top of, like the bridge endpoints that are built on top of that, will need to make a value judgment about kind of security and cost and speed, for each of the underlying mechanisms that they're dependent on.
yeah, because I mean, I was thinking like maybe you would want to have like let's say you needed 3 of 5, like, you know, like Joe and Gnosis AMB, you know, and maybe Wormhole, they'll be like really fast, and because they're, you know, simply signing. And then like if you had a more decentralized one, say like a teller, or like I don't know how long Sysync takes, but like, you know, then you have the trade-off like always of like, if it's more decentralized, then it's going to just take longer and be more expensive. So,
Right.
you know, like you
Actually,
would, yeah.
I think the nice thing here is you probably could still operate in a scenario like this, and not necessarily require that slower, more expensive mechanism to always report. So say you've got
That's what I
these
was
three
saying,
things,
yeah.
right? You've got Joe, you've got the AMB, and you've got Wormhole, right? You need, and then you've got Teller and Succinct on there as well, right? In most cases, Joe, Wormhole, and the AMB all agree, and they all agree pretty much instantly, and so you can bridge your message straight
Yep.
away. But Joe defects and starts let's say Joe just goes offline, stops reporting. Now that Joe's offline, then you need Succinct or Teller to report to reach a threshold.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, I like that model, because I think then it's almost like you can have the decentralized fallbacks in a way, and you could push it off relatively easily. So,
right.
But yeah, no, I like the system. I'm excited. As a user of the Omni Bridge, I'm excited for an upgrade.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be an interesting process, kind of getting to that. We've got to get kind of hashi to the point that we're really comfortable with it, and then shift focus onto upgrading the Omni bridge. But I think it'll be a really great improvement.
Yeah, so I guess what's your timeline there, and what are the next steps for this?
Yeah, I have no idea on timelines. I don't
I'm
know.
not
I would say,
no token.
yeah. I don't know. I would say in the order of, I don't know. I don't want to make it would be many months or potentially.
Okay, is it
Maybe,
under 3 years?
I would guess so. Yes, yes. Under
Okay,
3 years, I
so
think is a very
we'll hold your
reasonable
feet to the fire on
prediction.
that one.
Yeah. I think that's a really reasonable thing to make a soft commitment to.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember whenever Gnosis bought XDAI, so it was a while ago now, but it was awesome. So
Yeah.
um all right. No, but this was really cool. Thank you so much. Where can people find out more? If you want to point them.
Yeah, if you want to keep track of hashi, probably the GitHub repo is the best place at the moment. github.com/gnosis/hashi. Um, Otherwise, keeping an eye on the Gnosis blog, the Gnosis Twitter account, Gnosis Guild Twitter account, and then I guess my Twitter account, I'll be chatting about it. It's just at Oren_Macmillan. And yeah, I think when things are kind of progressing to where end users can start taking advantage of it, then yeah, we'll definitely be loud about it.
Yeah, well, you guys definitely ship stuff, so I know it'll be live at some point in some form. So thanks so much. This was
Cheers.
a blast.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.